Boker Tov, yeah. Boker Tov. Tov, as usual, this year's Shurim are dedicated to the memory of Elisheva Sima, Bat Zalman, Zechuna Livracha, the daughter of Hallie Frist, who told me she went to America for a few days. You can turn down your phones or put it on vibrate, whatever, so we don't just get disturbed in the middle of the shir, if you don't mind. We're beginning with that page that we're working on for the last 2 weeks, but the second side in the middle, we'll just start with source number 19 for a moment, and then get on to the core of the shir from number 20 till 23, the bottom of the page. From Yecheskel, Perek Lamed Chet. From Yecheskel, Perek Lamed Chet, you have the pasuk Vitgadilti Vitkadishti. That's going to sound very familiar from Yitgadal V'Yitkadash. And obviously, the author of the Kaddish, which we don't have such a text in the days of the Mishnah or Gemara, but from the days of the Geonim, which were dated about 1,200, 1,300 years old, we have a text of Kaddish. There is a SIDDUR called SIDDUR Rav Amram Gaon, one of the earliest formal Siddurim that we have. I mean, bits and pieces we have in the Mishnah, bits and pieces, but we don't have a formal SIDDUR that somebody can look into and know what the davening was. And I'll just point out parenthetically that when the SIDDUR official appears, and later on in the Middle Ages we have different versions of a SIDDUR based on different customs and different versions of the davening. So there's sometimes the word was used SIDDUR, which means in order, and we've spoken about already the fact that Shmoneh Esrei has to be in order. And sometimes they use the word machzor. Now today we use the word machzor for special davenings like Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and for Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. We call it a machzor, and that's because it's periodic. I would translate the word machzor as periodic tefillot, not regular tefillot. So siddur we use for daily tefillot, perhaps also siddur for Shabbat, and a machzor we'll use for Yom Tov or Yomim Noraim. But in the days of the Rishonim, the word machzor also meant siddur. So there's a machzor Vitry. Vitry is a town in France, and they were Talmidim of Rashi. And that siddur, called machzor Vitry, is of great importance because Rashi wrote a commentary to the Torah and to the Gemara. But we also have Shelot Utshuvot. We have responsa literature from Rashi that most people aren't even aware of. Rashi was a posek halacha. And like any posek, sometimes he was asked about davening, and he had something to say about the versions of the tefillah, the nusach tefillah, and these nuschaot of Rashi are expressed in the machzor Vitry. So if somebody's trying to do a research project, what was the nusach of the siddur that Rashi used? In all likelihood, it was going to be close to the machzor Vitry. So you have already siddurim, formal siddurim, in the days of the Rishonim. In the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam gives us a siddur as an appendix to the laws of tefillah. Gives us a siddur. So we have already a siddur in the Middle Ages, but it begins in the late Geonic era. I say again, about 1,200 years ago, we already have a formal siddur. And that's where Kaddish is authored, and it was authored in Aramaic. And that's a story in itself, why Kaddish is in Aramaic and not in Hebrew. But and the different reasons for it, and sometimes when there are too many reasons, then you can assume that we don't really have a finger on the real reason or the original reason. Yeah, Faksha. In those days, everybody understood. That's for sure. There's no question. So let me just digress, and I say something that I said 100 times over, but it's worth repeating, and that is today we're familiar with Yiddish. So Yiddish is nothing but a German dialect with Hebrew letters, Aleph Bet, with a little Hebrew flavoring thrown in, or Yiddish atam, a little Yiddish Jewish flavoring, and that's our Yiddish. And our Yiddish is about 500-600 years old, no more than that, when Jews migrated to Germany for the umpthiest time, because they were in and out of Germany. But Yiddish already gets picked up by the 15th, 16th century. We already have some beginnings of Yiddish. But one thing we know, that you can easily identify a Jew today whose family heritage is from Hungary, from Poland, from Germany, from Lithuania, by their Yiddish. Just listen to the Yiddish, and you'll know right away if he's speaking a Galicianische Yiddish, a Yiddish that comes from Galicia, a Yiddish that comes from Lita. And, the way we heard Rav Soloveitchik for his Litvische Yiddish, that was one way, and the Hungarian Jews in Borough Park had their Yiddish a little different way. And then you have the kids growing up in Yiddish-speaking homes, but in environments where there's a different language out there on the street, like modern-day Israel. So if you go even to Mea Shearim, where the kids are being educated and they're spoken to in Yiddish at home, those kids know Hebrew. They know Hebrew because they hear it on the street, and there's no way they cannot know Hebrew. The only thing is that sometimes their Yiddish gets already peppered with some Hebrew words that they've picked up on the street. No different than kids in America who, in Hasidic families in Borough Park, for example, grow up in a Yiddish-speaking environment at home and Yiddish-speaking environment in school, will speak English. I mean, it's a broken English, it's a broken English, but less broken than their parents, and certainly less broken than their grandparents' English. But their Yiddish is also peppered with English words. For example, if you say in Yiddish, open the window, in true Yiddish, it's going to be öffne die Fenster. Fenster is a German word, öffne die Fenster. But in New York, the kids are going to say öffne die Winde. Öffne die Winde. Open the window. Because the word window made it into the Yiddish, yeah. So it was asked to Dr. Yosef Burg, Oliver Shalom. Yeah. And the one who spoke about it was Avshalom Kor, who's this great linguist here in Israel. I call him Mori v'Rabbi Lashon. Avshalom Kor. Right, he used to be the MC for the Tanakh, Hidon Tanakh and Yom Sfot for many, many years. And he wrote a book, Yofi Shel Ivrit. He's still on radio on Galei Tzahal with his 30-second blurb about something about Hebrew, and you always learn something new from him. So he quoted Dr. Burg. He actually asked Dr. Burg if he has an idea where the word daven may come from, because it's used in Yiddish. We spell it out D-A-V-E-N when we write English, because the Reform Jews go to temple and pray. But a Jew, a Yid, goes to shul and davens, right? Praying is something that somebody else does. We don't pray. Pray is a goyish word. We daven. Daven's an exclusively Yiddish word that we don't even know what the source is. So Dr. Burg suggested that it could be a corruption of the word kivun, which is kavanah. Kavanah. The core emotion of davening is having focus and concentration, and that's called kavanah, as Chazal say, im kiven libo, and it could be that the word kivun became divun and daven. It could have grown into these words. These things happen in language where sometimes certain syllables get flipped, but the core word might be the same anyway. I'll give an example. Rav Shamshon Nefal Hirsch, who will sometimes play with the grammar and the etymology of a word, says in Parshat Emor al Kohanim b'nei Ahron, so he says Kohen, Kaf Hey Nun, actually comes from Kaf Vav Nun, which means kivun, which means direction, and the Kohen was somebody who showed direction. He was the guide, he was the leader, he was the teacher, and therefore the Mechavein was the Kohen. This is Hirsch's idea, take it or leave it. It's as good as anything else. So Dr. Burg played around with the word daven and kivun in a similar way, and he said it could be. He didn't say it absolutely, but for the lack of a better idea, so I'm quoting Dr. Burg on this one, who was very knowledgeable. His intuition for languages were very good. He was knowledgeable in many, many, many languages. At the Chidon Tanakh for many years, he was the one who asked the questions as the head of the panel of judges, and kids came from all over the world, and he responded to the kids in whatever language they talked to. It was translation for everybody, but he was good. He was very good. The only person I knew more languages than Dr. Burg. There were two people I thought knew more languages. One was Pope John II. He knew a wealth of languages. It was unbelievable. He really did. And the other was Lahavdil, the Lubavitch Rebbe. The Lubavitch Rebbe would respond to the language of the person who spoke to him when he came to see him, which was pretty good, because a lot of people came to see him from all walks of the world, all corners of the world. And he knew languages. thank you for the interruption, because it was good interruption. This is what Rabbi Tendler taught us to develop the art of constructive batala. He says when you teach, what's on the table is on the table, but what you amplify, that's what people are going to remember. Or Rabbi Harry Wahlberg, Zichron Livracha, a great rabbi in Borough Park, used to say, "V'lo ha-medrash ika ela ha-maisala." It's not the medrash that you say in the drasha, but the story that goes along with it, that's what people are going to remember, the anecdotes and so on. So right. So I just lost my train already. The thought. Where was I up to? Right. No, SIDDUR was way back. DAVEN. Yeah, I was into davening. The Aram. Yeah, okay. Let's get back to the Aramaic Kaddish. So Kaddish was in Aramaic because obviously people spoke that language at the time. Some want to say that it was a language that the Malachim didn't know. Okay, I'm telling you, there are so many different reasons why it's Aramaic. In all likelihood, it was something that was known to the people, and Kaddish was originally instituted, actually, not in the formal Kaddish that we have today, but at least something that had to do with Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, which is a translation of Yehi Shem Hashem Mevorach Me'atav Ad Olam, that God's name should be great forever, which is a messianic prayer. It's for Yemot HaMashiach, Vayashem Lemelech HaKol Haaretz. And that's what Yehi Shem Hashem Mevorach Me'atav Ad Olam. And it was done by Rabbi Akiva for an orphan who wasn't bar mitzvah, because the original idea was that somebody who was in Avelut in the year of mourning, so he had the first right to be the Shliach Tzibur, the Chazan. So we call it in Shul a Chiyuv. You have obligation. People sometimes say, is there a Chiyuv? Gabbai will say, so I said, yeah, I'm chayiv to daven also. Everybody's chayiv to daven. Is there a chiyuv? Anybody here not chayiv to daven? But I know what he meant. But we use the word chiyuv, meaning an avel who has first crack at being the shliach tzibur. There are shuls that sometimes have fights over who has the first right, and some shuls think it's a brilliant idea to split the minyan and have different places in shul. The Rav said that's a biblical prohibition of lo tidgodedu. If there's an organized shul kihila, you can't bust up the minyan because somebody else has a right. There is a list in a sefer called Machne Ephraim that gives you the priority list of who comes first, second, third, and fourth for chiyuvim. So, somebody says, I have yahrzeit, for my mother-in-law's grandmother, that doesn't fly against somebody else who might have an earlier or more higher priority chiyuv. And that's the way it works with aliyot and for davenings and so on. But Rabbi Akiva was dealing with an orphan who wasn't bar mitzvah, so he can't be the shliach tzibur. So he said that he can say this Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach. And so it was originally instituted more for ktanim. And then it became upgraded that even mevugarim, adults, will say Kaddish in a Shnat Evel at certain junctures in the Tefillah. I mean, I've already seen a bar mitzvah boy read, and at the end of the Kriyat HaTorah on Shabbat there's Kaddish, and the father didn't want the boy to say Kaddish because he has parents. That's ridiculous. The Kaddish after Kriyat HaTorah is simply a chazan, is a shliach tzibur Kaddish. That's what it is. It's not like a Kaddish, a yatom. It's a Kaddish that you say after Kriyat HaTorah. That's all. So it's ridiculous to have, if he wants to say the kid's not prepared to say Kaddish, he get nervous, that's a different story. So you can prepare a kid it's good chinuch also to teach him how to say Kaddish. I remember when I taught in an afternoon Hebrew school many, many, many years ago. So in the syllabus, and this we were teaching kids who, in all likelihood, for many of them, after the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, they're never going to see a shul until 50 or 40 years later when they have to say Kaddish. So Kaddish was part of the syllabus. They would teach the kids how to say Kaddish because they knew next time they're going to come to shul is when their father dies or their mother dies, they're going to have to say Kaddish. Very sad commentary. But it was smart and sad. Right, it was smart and sad at the same time. So Kaddish is, Aramaic was used in the days of late Bayit Rishon, all of Bayit Sheni, all of the period of the Mishnah and Gemara as their Yiddish, which means it was the local idiom of Aramaic, which is a Semitic language, no different than Ugaritic and Akkadian. There are all kinds of ancient Semitic languages, and Aramaic was one of them. And Jews in Bavel and in Eretz Yisrael, used it as their language, and in writing Kitvei Kodesh, in holy writings, Gemara and so on, they used Aleph Bet, and they gave it a little bit some Jewish flavoring to it, exactly what happened to Yiddish in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. So the Yiddish now is based on a German dialect, then it was based on an Aramaic dialect. And you can tell the difference between the Aramaic of the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Aramaic, and the Aramaic of the Yerushalmi, of the Eretz Yisrael Aramaic, because they're different dialects. Yeah. Same way. Very good. So you have, before you even get to Ladino, you have the Judeo-Arabic of Rabbi Saadia Gaon, Yudah Levi, and the Rambam, and they're writing in Arabic, but it's not Arabic that you read in in Cairo today. It's Arabic with Hebrew letters and with Jewish flavoring to it, some Hebrew words thrown in and so on. And the Rambam writes most of his works in Judeo-Arabic, and Rav Saadia wrote the Emunot V'Dayot in Judeo-Arabic, and the Kuzari of Rabbi Yudah Levi is in Judeo-Arabic. Today everything's in translation, thank God, but the original was in Judeo-Arabic. Ladino is the Spanish Yiddish, and the Rashi had his own French Yiddish too. We call it Laz. Laz means V'lashon Amzar, and you have sometimes in Chumash and in the Gemara where Rashi will say that the explanation of this word, Bela'az, what is he writing there? He's writing French, but it's Aleph Bet. So what kind of French was ever written in Aleph Bet? Rashi's Yiddish. So Rashi had a Yiddish too, and that was his French, based on French. And Ladino was Spanish, and that was their Yiddish. And the German Jews and later used Yiddish, as we call it Yiddish. So that's why Kaddish was in Aramaic, no doubt. It was their familiar language at the time. And there are other, as I say, there are other reasons why it's Kaddish. But Yitkadel V'Kadesh Shmei Rabbi, which means that Kadosh Baruch Hu's name should be great and holy, his great name, Shmei Rabbi, his great name. And this based on this pasuk in source number 19, V'tgadilti v'tkadishti v'nodati le'inei hagoyim rabim v'yadu ki inei Hashem. Kadosh Baruch Hu's name is not only going to be known parochially, locally by Am Yisrael, but it's going to be known universally. And that's the great message of V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad shmo echad. It's going to be universally understood. And who set out for that mission? Who started that charge, if not Avram Avinu? Vayiven sham mizbeach vayikra b'shem Hashem. That Avram Avinu set up the Mizbeach and he calls out in the name of God. He's advertising. So the Ramban tells us in Parshat Lech Lecha that Avram Avinu set up shop by major intersections. So people or travelers, he would call them in for a cup of tea. And the Medrash says that Avram Avinu had 4 doors to his tent, so there was no excuse that he didn't see a guest, a potential visitor or traveler coming. He got you from all sides. And he brought you in for a cup of schnapps and a little leikach, a little cake, and Avram Avinu figured out what the Vishnitzer Rebbe figured out much later in life, that the way to a person's neshama is his gastronomical system. You give him a good meal, you give him something to eat, and you can talk religious business with him, and that's what Avram Avinu does. And it's interesting that the Torah says, "Vayiven sham mizbeach," and he sets up an altar, which means he sets up shop, a mizbeach and so on in his house, his tent. Vayikra b'shem Hashem, and he's calling out in the name of God. So once it says Vayikra b'shem Hashem el olam. That's the last time it's mentioned in Parshat Vayera, right before the Akedah. Vayikra b'shem Hashem el olam. That phrase, b'shem Hashem el olam, is used by the Rambam. The Rambam does what we call in computer language cut and paste. He lifts it out of the context of Parshat Vayera and he puts it on top of every single book that he writes in Torah. It begins with B'Shem Hashem El Olam. And Rav Kapach intuitively thinks, and I think he's 100% right, believes that what the Rambam is doing is he putting himself squarely in the position of Avram Avinu in the 12th century. He says, I'm continuing Avram Avinu's work. And the Rambam is a universalist. I wrote a whole chapter on this in my book on the Rambam, on the universality in Rambam's Mishnah Torah, where you can see that he's going way beyond the scope of Am Yisrael, but he's taking into consideration the world at large, and he sees himself as an Avram Avinu figure in his contemporary situation. So this Yitkadel V'Kadesh Shmei Rabbi is Yemot HaMashiach talk, and that's what it is. Why would Avelim, mourners, say Kaddish? It has nothing to do with death. Quite the contrary. It's a very upbeat, optimistic type of tefillah, because that's basically how Am Yisrael has trained itself to move on from tragedy, that there's going to be a better day. Today is horrible, today is horrific, today is tragic, today is mourning, today is crying, today is this, it's ripping kriya and everything, but there's going to be a day, yesh merabam varach. There is a tomorrow. And only people who train themselves that in the face of the greatest tragedies, there is a tomorrow, will have a tomorrow. I can tell you, I've interviewed no small number of Holocaust survivors, and each one, there's a common denominator. Everybody has a different story and different details, but there's a common denominator. Every single one of them, in the midst of tragedy, had a tomorrow. There was something to dream about, something to think about. And they told me that those people who gave up on tomorrow had no chance, had absolutely no chance of surviving. Doesn't mean that everybody who thought about tomorrow survived. Many did not. But those who did survive did have a tomorrow. I once, we had in our shul in Ramot many years ago, the two surviving daughters of the story that's in Schindler's List, in the film from Plaszow, from the transit camp, which is right outside Krakow. Nothing much is left of it but a big monument. But that was a train station where people were sent directly to Auschwitz from there. And there was in that transit station a wedding. How can you have a wedding? There was the men and women were separated in the camps. Anyway, they somehow snuck in the nighttime and they made a wedding. And there was even a woman, Masada Kedushin, and she even apologized. She says, this is what we have. And she does a Kedushin. It happens that both of them, and obviously they separated, and both of them survived the war, make it to Eretz Yisrael, remarry officially the Rabbanut here in Tel Aviv, and the two daughters of that marriage were on the speaking tour, and we had them once, I think maybe in either Yom HaShoah or Asara B'Tevet, whatever it was, we had them speak, and it was just fascinating to hear the story of their father. And they said he was a cartoon artist before the war, and he was a cartoon artist after the war. And in the camp, he was sketching all kinds of cartoons and so on. And it gave him a lift. But they said that wedding was the ultimate expression that there is a tomorrow. The fact that they were able to pull it off, as they say, and make a chuppah in Plaszow camp, under the noses of the Nazis without them knowing. Can you imagine if they would have found out? They would have murdered everybody on the spot. But it was tremendous Mesirut Nefesh that they did it, and they did it. And it was an act of Hineni Muchan, that there's tomorrow. There is a tomorrow. And Kaddish is an expression of there will be a tomorrow. Today it might be terrible, it might be hard and difficult. We may not even survive the today, but there is a tomorrow. And that was very important. So, Imkvar, we're on the word of Kaddish. An acquaintance of mine from Beersheba, who was a sensational Talmud Chacham and great scholar, a Talmud of the Rav, a Musmach, and also a professor at Ben Gurion University. We called him Jerry Blitzstein, but he professionally was known as Professor Yaakov Blitzstein, Zichrono Livracha, an absolutely special person, and unfortunately died young died before his time, let's say, from an illness. But he published a tremendous amount of material. He never admitted to me, but I have a hunch he was one of the readers of my doctorate from Bar Ilan, because he once spoke to me about it, and I think the only way he would have known certain things is had he read it. So I was very appreciative of him, and because they're not supposed to let you know. It's supposed to be a little bit of a Class A secret. But I think he was Megales Sodot. He somehow said enough that I got the picture. But he was really a splendid individual. So he wrote an article in Tradition from the Rabbinical Council of America. I think it's back in 1973. It's called Kaddish and Other Accidents. And what he basically wanted to say is there are phenomena in Jewish history, even in Halakha and Minhag, that just take off in different directions than their original intent. So Kaddish originally was something that was said after somebody studied Torah. What we call today Kaddish de Rabbanan is a Kaddish that's said after the study of Torah. So after Kriyat Torah, there's a Kaddish. After the study of Gemara and Medrash, there's a Kaddish. So there's a Kaddish, and that's why there's a Kaddish de Rabbanan in the SIDDUR. after the section of the korbanot and that we have in the SIDDUR. A lot of people come late to shul; they don't even bother saying it anymore. But there's a Kaddish. So some shuls they just say Rabbi Shmuel, so Kaddish, and they say Kaddish. A lot of people who say the Kaddish Rabbanan don't even bother saying the section of Rabbi Shmuel. They rely on the fact that the Chazan just said it. Fine. Or Ein Kolokenu, which is the Medrash of Pita Maktoret, which is also Torah Shebal Peh. So there's a Kaddish Rabbanan. So you have Kaddish Rabbanan after the study of Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law, and Kaddish after study of Torah Shebichtav, which is the Kaddish after Kriyat HaTorah. And that's where Kaddish originally started. But what became of Kaddish is something else. It became a Kaddish. It became a highly charged, emotionally packed tefillah for tragic moments and so on. Okay. So Rabbi Professor Blitzstein writes about it, called Kaddish and other accidents, he calls it. Like as if to say, this wasn't the original idea. It became something else. It morphed into something else. Very, very, very much so. So there was in the Shelot Uchuvot Mima'amakim of Rav Oshri, Zichrono Livracha, who was the 30-year-old Rav in the ghetto of Kovna. He was there on the spot, and he had to give answers. And when he B'chazdei Hashem survives, and he gets to New York. He died in 1988, if not mistaken. He was a shul rabbi in the Lower East Side, and Norfolk. See, I'm pretty good. See, okay. See, you see. I don't make up all the stories. Just some of them. It's like my daughter who told me, I saw your book on the Rambam's conversation. So where'd you see it? She said in the fiction section. And then she told me I made that story up too. She never said it. I remember she saying it. Whatever, the So yes, so he had material. What he did was he wrote down on a piece of paper certain salient points of the shuvot that he wrote, and he hid it in some canister. And after the war, it was actually found, and on the base of that, he was able to reconstruct it, and he put out 6 volumes called Shelot Uchuvot Mima Amakim, from the depths. I mean, just the title of the book says it all, where these Shelot Uchuvot came from the depths, from down and out, the Mima Amakim, from the Omek. And one question had to do with a moment where the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, ordered the murder of 10,000 people in one day. It was called an action, an action that and it turned out there was nobody who survived who didn't have somebody, who didn't lose somebody in that day. So the question was saying Kaddish collectively for everybody. And Rav Oshri raised the question whether or not there's a need for Kaddish after martyrs. Why? Because one of the main reasons that the Avelim say Kaddish is because it's a type of defense for the neshama. Look, everybody has slipped here and there, but there's no greater zchut, a merit for the neshama. Look, I left over children who are sanctifying God's name in public. Mekadesh Shem Shemayim Barabim, and that's Kaddish. So I wasn't such a terrible guy if they're all said and done. So that's really one of the reasons that the Avelim say Kaddish. So the question was, if that's the reason for Kaddish, then martyrs don't need it. Because the Rambam says in a letter that he wrote to Yemen, he says a person who dies, was killed because he's Jewish, even if he's a Rasha like Yeravam ben Nevat, has automatic Olam Haba. So what do you need the Kaddish for? So that was a legitimate question. So Rav Oshri writes that in the 15th century, there was a pogrom, as there were so many pogroms in the Middle Ages, and the question was asked, if I'm not mistaken, to the author of the Sefer Trumas Hadeshen, and he also was asked the same question. He said there are other reasons why we say Kaddish, so even if it's after martyrdom, we should say Kaddish. So they decided they're all going to say Kaddish, that it's very therapeutic for the Avelim. For the mourners themselves, it's therapeutic. Forget about the neshama. Don't worry about the neshama. Worry about the Avelim who were just shattered, and there's a need for them to begin the therapeutic process of rebuilding their spiritual life. And Kaddish is a very, very important ingredient in that rebuilding and rehabilitation. So they all decided to say Kaddish together. Rav Oshri testifies how it was like exhilarating and horrific at the same time. Every single person saying Kaddish together. And this really was the idea of the Yom HaKaddish HaKlali that the Rabbanut Rashit wanted on the Asara B'Tevet, that anybody who had family members perish in the Shoah and didn't know what the date was, so let's all say Kaddish together. It was a great idea. The problem is that today, that generation of second generationers are no longer with us today. You have a handful of people left who are still saying Kaddish. So there was a suggestion that maybe it should go pass down to the next generation, that the grandchildren of those people should continue. So the Rabbanut Rashit is so weak that they really never put that together. I think it would be a very important add-on. But they'll never do it. They'll never do it, so it's gonna pass away. What? The elections was supposed to be, but because of the war, it's being pushed, and because of political shenanigans, it was pushed, and it's a very sad state of affairs. So I had a chapter in my book on the conversation with the Rav when I asked him, Bechutzpati, I asked him, so why didn't he accept Ben Gurion's offer in '59 to be the Rav Rashi after Rav Herzog died? Now, the truth is the Rav was asked by 1,000 people, and he gave 1,000 different answers. That's the way the Rav was. He gave the answer to what you wanted to hear. But I asked him that I heard that the Rav's uncle, who was still alive, Rav Velvela Soloveitchik, was very vehemently against it. So the Rav admitted to me that uncle was against it, but he says that wasn't the critical. He said what was the clincher was that the position of chief rabbi is not anchored in Shulchan Aruch, but it's anchored in the law of the Knesset. And therefore you are, it's called in Hebrew, a Rav Mita'am. You are a Rav for the government. And you cannot say what you want to say, when you want to say, and how you want to say. He said he felt the Rav Rashi's hands are tied and did not have that independence that he believed a Rav should have in a Kehillah. And he said, I have respect for those who were the chief rabbis, but it's not for me. That's what he said, it's not for me. And then as an afterthought, mamish, this is like shooting from the hip, as an afterthought, he says, you know, in all the government offices in Israel, they have photo gallery of the predecessors. In the president's house you have it, and in the prime minister's office, and in the various ministers' office, as well as in the chief rabbinate, you have the gallery of all the predecessors. The Rav says, I don't have a problem being on the wall with those who were. Rav Kook, Rav Herzog, Rav Uziel. I might have a problem being on the wall with those who are going to come afterwards. Wow. That was prophetic. That was prophetic. You know, a chief rabbi went to jail for corruption, a chief rabbi who may not be a big Talmud Chacham, he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be there. And it's a tremendous insight because I think he foresaw what was happening and what direction it was going, to be so highly politicized. It was political from moment one, except that the politicians understood that, number one, this should not really be an election, but it should be an appointment of a great Talmud Chacham who had the ability. So Rav Kook fitted the bill, Rav Uziel fitted the bill, Rav Herzog fitted the bill, and there's no question they fitted the bill. It became challenged after Rav Unterman. Rav Unterman also was a very, very big Talmud Chacham. He came from England, and he wasn't as flamboyant as let's say, Rav Goren later on. But what happened was Rav Unterman had a fallout with the Sephardi Rav Nisim, and they didn't talk to each other. I mean, at the Mizrahi convention, they had to put Rav Nisim on one side of the dais and Rav Nisim on the other, and to bring them in at different times and have them speak when one wasn't there. I mean, it was a bizoyan. It was really disaster. And that was there was an attempt to correct this by unseating them, because what happened was, in the law of the chief rabbinate, there was always you can always be re-elected every 5 years. It was a 5-year term, and you could be re-elected until you wanted to keep going on, or until the Malach HaMavos took you away. So everybody was always re-elected. Everybody died in office, essentially. And the first time there was a challenge was in 1972, when I was here in Israel for the year. And it was the two incumbents, Rav Nisim and Rav Unterman, were challenged by Rav Avad Yosef and Rav Goren. And they beat them. They unseated. For the first time, chief rabbis were actually unseated. That became a political hassle later on, and they made it into a 10-year non-renewable term, and that ended in 1982 and so on. Yeah. Who does voting? 150 people. 150 people. They are 75 politicians. who are ministers and members of the Knesset, based on the division of the Knesset by political lines, and 75 rabbis who are city rabbis, community rabbis, and members of the religious ministry who work in the ministry, and so on. So it's basically 150 people vote for the chief rabbi. That's it. So once you know it's divided on political lines, so then all you have to do is make political, incorporate the decisions into the coalition agreements. So it's all, wrangling with the politicians. I mean, in 1992, it was very clear that not only was the Sephardi chief rabbi orchestrated by Rav Avad Yosef, but it was also the Ashkenazi was orchestrated by Rav Avad Yosef. It was Rav Avad Yosef who decided that Rav Lau was going to be the chief rabbi. Yep. No, these are known. But this is what happened. It became, and now you take a look what's happening. I mean, it's just a question of just a family affair. It's all what's the word? Nepotism. It's all nepotism. That's all it is. Nepotism. Even in terms of the candidates who are considered right now, it's all nepotism. Derry's brother, and this one's brother, and this one's son, and this one's father. It's very sad. Very, very sad. Very, very sad. Yeah. Right. They become irrelevant. The chief rabbinate has become actually irrelevant, because the Haredi world never respected them anyway. But the Haredi world's fighting tooth and nail that the Dati Le'umi shouldn't get it. That's basically what happened. They'll say the fact that they don't look at the chief rabbinate, that's a different story. But they don't want that we should have that the Dati Le'umi should have it. It's a big issue. It's a big issue, for sure. Okay. Anyway, so we said something about Kaddish and some nasty things about the chief rabbinate. Fine. Let's move on. Right. The source number 21 talks about Hakel HaGadol HaGibor VaHanorah. It's from Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshat Ekev. Ki Hashem Elokechem, 20, source number 20. Ki Hashem Elokechem Hu Elokei Elokim v'Adonei Adonim Hakel HaGadol HaGibor VaHanorah Asher lo yisa panim v'lo yikach shochad. Kadosh Baruch Hu, you can't bribe him, and so on. So you have 4 descriptions of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Hakel HaGadol HaGibor VaHanorah. Now we say this in Shemona Esrei every day. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak v'Elokei Yaakov Hakel HaGadol HaGibor VaHanorah. Now, if you remember Nishmat Kol Chai that we say Shabbos morning before Shachris starts, so Shachris officially starts with Baruch Hu, except that on Shabbat, the person who's going to be the Shliach Tzibur for Baruch Hu gets started by Shochanad. Shochanad is the middle of Nishmat, and it moves with the last few sentences or poetry that the Shliach Tzibur, as if to say, there's no such thing as a Shliach Tzibur for Psuga de Zimra. It could be a 8-year-old boy. In the Sephardi Beit Knesset, there is no chazan for Shliach. It's just somebody sitting on the side, says it out loud, and he's keeping the pace. That's all. He's a pace keeper, setter. So Shliach Tzibur actually begins with the Kaddish before Baruch Hu on Shacharit. But the minhag has it that the chazan gets up there and he starts Shochanad, and on Yom Tov he begins with Hakel B'Tza'atu Motozecha, and on Yom Neroim he begins with Hamelech HaYoshev. So without getting into that minhag's issue, if you look at Hakel B'Ta'atzumot Uzecha, Hakel B'Ta'atzumot Uzecha, Hagadol B'Chvod Shemecha, Hagibor L'Netzach V'Hanora B'Norotecha, Hanora B'Norotecha, Hamelech HaYoshev Akisei Ram V'Nisa. So you have Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora, and Melech. And that's what you have in Shemona Esrei. Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora. Then there's Kel Elyon, and then there's Melech, Ozer, Mashiach Magen. So all of those descriptions, it's like a forerunner, it's a prepping of the Davener for what's going to happen in Shemona Esrei. Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora, and Melech. These phrases, this phrase, Kel Gadol Gibor V'Norah, is lifted out of Parshat Ekev from Moshe Rabbeinu. But last week in the Haftarah for Parshat Bahar, we read from Yirmiyahu Perek Nun Bet, Lamed Bet rather, a very, very beautiful section where Chanamel, the cousin of Yirmiyahu, is forfeiting his land, and he needs somebody in the family to redeem the land, which plays into what we have in Parshat Bahar, Geulat HaSadeh. And Yirmiyahu is the nearest cousin. He's the nearest relative. It's like when guys used to come to Israel to learn for a year, so, they have a fifth cousin here. So that became mishpacha to go to for Shabbat, All of a sudden you reminded yourself that you have a cousin. You have some mishpacha, you have krovim in Israel. V'seidah. So Hanamel was looking for a karov mishpacha, some type of relative. And Yirmiyahu steps forward because the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, buy the land, purchase the land from Hanamel. So he says, everything he's been saying up to now is everything's going to be destroyed. So buying land right now is not exactly a good deal. Now to buy real estate, and the message was, Odi kanu batim v'sadot. You will be purchasing of land. It's going to happen again. So you buy the land and make a document, put it in a good kli and save it for posterity. Because your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, are going to be able to whip out this document and say, hey, my Elta Zayda bought a shtickle karka, a piece of land here in Eretz Yisrael. And that was a tremendous idea of tomorrow. There's going to be a tomorrow. In spite of the message of destruction, there's going to be a tomorrow. And Yirmiyahu was asked to actualize it. And then when he turns to Kadosh Baruch Hu and he says, why should I do this? And he turns to Kaddish Baruch Hu and he says in source number 21, Oseh chesed lalafim u'mishalem avon avot el chek b'neihem achreihem hakel hagadol hagibor. Something's missing. What's with Noah? So in source number 22, the Gemara asked this question. So first thing is, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah adopted the phrase hakel hagadol hagibor v'Norah in the Shmon Esrei from Moshe Rabbeinu. Fine, that was okay. But then Yirmiyahu deletes Hanorah. And we're going to find that Daniel in his tefillah deletes Gibor. And then the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah restored it all. They put it all back to Hakel HaGadol HaGibor v'Norah. So here you have a whole two Gemarot, 22 and 23 on this. Hahu denachit kamei de Rav Chanina. There was somebody who went over to DAVEN publicly, and in his tefillah, he says, Hakel hagadol hagibor v'norah v'adir v'aoz v'yiru v'chazak v'amitz and he goes on and on v'nichmad. And so Rav Chanina is waiting till this man finishes all these great expressions of praise. Ki siyem, when he finishes, Amarlu, siyamtinu l'chule shifchei demarach. Did you finish? You got through all the phrases of God? You said it all? You got it all in? Lama li kulei hai. What do you have to say all these for? We only say three expressions. The three expressions is Hagadol Gibor v'Norah. The word Hakel is obviously like part of the original bracha. So what are you going on? So he says, Anan Hanitlat Amrin. We say three. Ilav de Amrin and Moshe Rabbeinu Baraita. If not for Moshe Rabbeinu saying these phrases in the Chumash, Ve'atu Anshe Knesset Hagdolah v'tiknu b'tfilah, and the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah instituted in a tfilah, Lo avin and yecholim l'meimer. We couldn't even say these. So we have a heter, we have a permissibility, we have a license to say these three. And you're going to say all of these? It's like, he says, Mashal, compared to Melech Basav Adam. You have a human mortal king, he was rich, and he has Elef Alfei Dinarei Zahav. He's filthy rich, right? And he's being praised that he has a few silver coins. I mean, that's insulting. A man who's got coins of gold, and you're going to praise him. Oh, this king, he's got a few coins of silver coins in his pocket. That's an insult. So, to say all these phrases about the Kadosh Baruch Hu is like a genai. It's an insult to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So, if not for the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us a formula, say this and that's it, and Anshe Knesset Hagdolah copied it, we would not be able to say anything about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the truth of the matter is, this is the big problem of saying any type of praise to God. It's a big problem. It's a philosophical problem. Because in Nishmat Kol Chai, we say, Ilu finu malei shira kayam, ulshonenu rina kamon galav, v'siftotenu shevach kemerchavei rakia. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu would have given us the ability of language, of every single word that could be said about a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ein anachnu maspikim lahodot. We can never get through. We can never get through. And the Rav explained this once in a way where I used my own analogy, story. There was once a newspaper, Hatzofeh, Zal. It morphed into Makor Rishon, actually. But there was somebody, why did we read Hatzofeh? Not so much for the news. The news was actually stale. It was 2 days old. Somebody once said that the editor, what? Right, they got Mariv, right. Somebody once said that the editor of Mariv was a Navi. Shmuel Schnitzer was a Navi. He always knew what they're going to print in Hatzofeh in 2 days. He was a Navi. Why did we read Hatzofeh? And Hatzofeh, people didn't buy it. They read it because they took it from the neighbors. Right? You picked it up for free at Bank Mizrahi or at the Amuna or in Bnei Akiva, in the Yeshiva Bnei Akiva. And very few people actually paid for it. But a lot of people read it. And you know why you read it? For the social announcements. You want to know who got bar mitzvah, who got married, who got engaged, Leb Nebuch, who's not with us any longer. And that's why you read it. It wasn't for the news. It was just to see what's doing in our oilam, in our community. You got that from the Hatzofeh. So there was a guy who wanted to put in an ad wishing Mazel Tov to some Rav, and he was nervous that this Rav is going to be insulted if he doesn't write all his titles. Because, you can be Harav HaGaon, Harav HaGaon HaTzadik, Harav HaGaon HaTzadik HaChasid, Harav HaGaon HaTzadik. I mean, you can go on and on and on. So this guy putting in the ad, fearing that this Rav is going to be insulted by how he writes the ad. So he writes, L'chvod Harav HaGaon v'chulei v'chulei v'chulei, etc., etc., etc. Now, so I'm admitting that he's way beyond Harav HaGaon. I don't have a clue what he is, but it's part of etc., 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 v'chulei v'chulei. So the Rav actually said, this is how we get out of Hallel. Hallel, that's it. You said a few chapters of Hallel from Tilim, Kuf Yud Gimel, Kuf Yud Dalet, Kuf Tet Vav, Kuf Yud Zayin, Kuf Yud Zayin, Kuf Yud Chet. That's it. You're finished. No. We repeat the last phrases twice. You ever figure out why in Hallel we say Otcha Kianetani V'Ti L'Yeshua, Otcha Kianetani V'Yeshua, Even Mantorah Manu Manu, Even Hodu L'Hashem Kitov K'lam Chasdor, Hodu L'Hashem Kitov. Why do we do it twice? Until the last Hodu L'Hashem Kitov K'lam Chasdor. There's a Mishnah that says the places that have a custom to double the last phrases, we double. We all double. That's our minhag. Mokom Shenagu Lichpol. Why do we double it? We double it because we want to show Kadosh Baruch Hu we're not through. We're not through. So symbolically, it's the etc., etc. And then the Rav said by Kaddish, it's the same thing. So what is Kaddish? Kaddish is 10 expressions of praise. It begins with Yitkadel V'Kadesh, and then goes on to another 8. Yitparech, Yishtabach, Yitpa'er, Yitromem, Yaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal. And I'm going to say it now in Hebrew. Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shmei D'Kudsha Baruch Hu. Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God is all of the above. That's it. No, he's le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma. Simple Hebrew. He is lemala mikol divrei shirot v'tishbechot v'shevach shene'emar ba'olam. He's way above every expression of praise and song that was ever said in this world. That's what it means. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma. Which means it's v'chule v'chule. It's etc., etc. That's what it is. And that's how we elegantly exit Kaddish, by acknowledging that whatever we said doesn't even add up to a small down payment. And that's how we do it. And that's why we're able to say Hakel Gadol Gibon V'Norah by a Kadosh Baruch Hu, because Moshe Rabbeinu said it. And a Kadosh Baruch Hu gave his rubber stamp on Sefer Dvarim. So it's okay. And Anshe Knesset Gdolah lifted out of context. So the question is... Yefeh. In Yom Neraim, we say La'ela, La'ela, above and beyond. I'll translate that. La'ela, La'ela, above and beyond. Why? It's a good kasha. What does that have to do with Yom Neraim? So you're going to see 100,000 drushas on this, but I'll tell you the truth, the historic truth. The Yemenites say La'ela, La'ela in their Nusach of Kaddish the whole year. And many times in the formation of Nusach, we have the compromise idea. And that is, we'll do one nusach some of the times, and the other nusach other times, to acknowledge that there's another nusach. So with regard to La'ela and La'ela, La'ela, the compromise became, we'll say La'ela the whole year, and in Yom Neraim we'll upgrade it to La'ela, La'ela. But the Yemenites say La'ela, La'ela the whole year. Very similar to the bracha of Hashkivenu. in Ma'ariv. So it ends in the weekday, Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad, God who guards everybody forever. On Shabbat, it's Haporei Sukkot Shalom Aleinu Ba'Kol Amo Yisrael Val Yerushalayim, Shabbos and Yom Tov. And that became the big machloket here in Israel. What about the Ma'ariv of Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim? And Baruch Hashem, a machloket, Rabbanim this, Rabbanim that, Beseda. So what's that all about? Why in Shabbos is Haporei Sukkot Shalom? The answer is that there were two original versions. There was the Babylonian version, Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad, that was said in the weekday and on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And there was the Eretz Yisrael Nusach, that it was Haporei Sukkot Shalom Aleinu, that was said on Shabbos, Yom Tov, and weekday. Those are the two Nuschaot. What ultimately, when the dust settled, it became a compromise that we would say the Babylonian version in the weekday. It made a lot of sense because we needed a lot of protection, Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad, and on Shabbat and Yom Tov, we would somehow rise above the tzarot, the troubles of the day, and think about rebuilding Yerushalayim. Haporei Sukkot Shalom. So we moved into the Eretz Yisrael mode on Shabbos and Yom Tov. That became the compromise. So that's what happened with Leila and Leila. One who wrote about this was Rav Shperva in his book Minhagei Yisrael. It's already 8 volumes, Minhagei Yisrael. And he has a whole chapter in the first volume about customs that came about by compromise. I mean, the most eye-opening was the Yekish minhag of waiting 3 hours between meat and milk, where it has no basis in the original sources, but there was the 6 hour of the Rif and the Rambam, which then became Shulchan Aruch, and the 1 hour, which became the upgraded Chumrah of Ashkenaz. 1 hour. Because before Rabbeinu Tam didn't know from 1 hour. Rashi's grandson didn't know from 1 hour. He just knew about washing your mouth out between milk and meat and finishing the meal with Birkat HaMazon. So according to Rashi and his grandson Rabbeinu Tam, if you've had a bisari meal, a fleshik meal, and you said Birkat HaMazon or Bracha Achrona, you washed the mouth out, you can have an ice cream. But that was the minhag in Ashkenaz until the 13th century, when the Zohar appears. I don't want to get into the question who wrote the Zohar, but the Zohar was not known before the 13th century. And in the 13th century, where the Zohar appears, so in Parshat Mishpatim, there is a thought that we should upgrade and wait an hour between milk and meat and milk in both directions. So the direction from meat to milk became accepted in certain areas of Poland only to the extent of a half an hour or 31 minutes. I grew up on that shita. 31 minutes, you wait the majority of an hour. But from meat to milk, it still was 1 hour by the days of the Ramah, and the Ramah says we should upgrade to 6 hours. He said a person who has Yirat Shamayim should upgrade to 6 hours, and his grandson, his granddaughter who marries the Shach, Rabbi Shapri Cohen, says anybody who has Torah fragrance, Reach Torah, should keep 6 hours. And slowly but surely, Eastern European Jewry, Poland, Hungary, Russia, upgrade from 1 hour to 6 hours. And when that fight moves west and gets to Germany, so the Yekis didn't want to move from there 1 hour, but there was a fight, and when the dust settled on German soil, so there were two compromise minhagim emerge. One was the Hamburg minhag of 4 hours, and then there was the Frankfurt minhag of 3 hours, and then the survival of the fittest, the Darwinian theory. So the 3 hours overcame the 4 hours, and that became the German minhag for the last 300, 400 years. That became the German minhag of 3 hours, and then German migrants to England brought the 3 hours to America, to Australia, and all of a sudden you're hearing about these 3 hours. The fight never made it to Holland. And that's why the Dutch Jewish community kept the 1 hour that was in vogue from the 13th century. It's not that they were makel, they were lenient. They never caught wind of the fact that it was upgraded. So until this very day, Dutch Jews still keep the 1 hour. When I taught Midreshet Moriah, a young lady told me, I don't care who I marry as long as he's Dutch. And you go over to the 1 hour. And I'll just say parenthetically, because Shir's going to end soon, that the Aruch HaShulchan, 19th century Navardik, writes right? Novartis is in Belarus. I was there once with a group. They once wrote, the Aruch HaShulchan writes, that the 1 hour Shita for Ashkenazim is still there on the books for people who are sick, for elderly, for young people. Notice you don't have to take a 3-year-old. I once saw this in Ramat Eshkol in the Merkaz, that the mother was buying ice cream for kids, and there was a 3-year-old there, and the mother didn't want to give him the ice cream. Why? Because 3 hours before he ate fleischiks, and you have to wait 6 hours and so on. I didn't think that was terribly wise. The Aruch HaShulchan says that the 1 hour view is still there for people in need. So of course, every person has to understand what's considered a need. If a person has a stomach issue and the doctor says you should eat milk products, so you're not going to wait 6 hours and have your stomach burn with digestional juices because you're waiting the 6 hours. Yeah. Elderly is not defined by age, but it's a state of mind. Okay? So I wouldn't have a clue what it is. Okay? Not a clue. I will tell you that a few years ago, when I was then 67 years old, a few years ago, okay? I got on the 15 bus in Katamon by my house, and the bus was packed at 8 in the morning, and two 15-year-old high school kids without kippot wanted to get up and give me a seat. That was very nice. I said, no, it's okay. Thank God, I can stand everything. And he tries to give it a second time. Guy gets up. I said, no, you can sit, I can stand. And then I told him, I said, by the way, do you know why you wanted to get up and give me the seat? He looks at me bewildered. I said, take a look behind the driver. There's a sticker, and it says, Mipnei Seva Takum. But there's only one catch. Seva in the halacha is 70 years old, and I'm not there yet. The guy looks at me and he says, but you look it. He made my day, he made my week, but you look, atanirekach. That was the quote. Atanirekach. Okay, so just in case I was wondering if I'm a hit the seva. Seva is a state of mind. The state of mind, right? So there are people who are skenim at age 50, and there are people who are young at age 80, okay? So think young, because it has a lot to do, state of mind has a lot to do with your health. Tremendous amount to do with your health. And therefore, there are people who've been kvetching since age 40 or 30. They're kvetching, okay, sad, kvetching, going through life kvetching. Stop kvetching. That's it, You make the most of what you have. Doesn't mean, my father-in-law, Vashom, used to say, if you pass 50 and you're not taking pills, you're dead. Okay, fine. Besada, so you can take pills, but just keep it rolling, keep it riding. Okay, this week is Yom Yerushalayim, in Tuesday night and Wednesday. So I'm just going to say one last word. I opened up Yeshayahu Hanavi, and it's a Perik Lamed Gimel that says, Melech biyofyo techazena einecha, tir'ena eretz merchakim. Does the phrase techazena einenu mean something? Of course, from Shemona Esrei. V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion brachamim. It's another example where Chazal lifted out of context a phrase that has to do with the nevuah of a Kadosh Baruch Hu returning to Yerushalayim and everybody seeing it. So Rav Charlap, the great student of Rav Kook, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Charlap, in our neighborhood in Katamon we have a street, Rehov Charlap, that's a memory of. He said, why do we have to say v'techazena einenu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should allow us to see it? Just come back to Yerushalayim and that's it. Why v'techazena einenu? So he said very prophetically, because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu come back to Yerushalayim, there are going to be plenty of Jews not seeing it. They're not going to see it. They're going to be blind. They're not going to acknowledge that it's a Kadosh Baruch Hu returning to Yerushalayim. So we ask a Kadosh Baruch Hu that we should be part of the crowd that has the schut, the merit to see it and acknowledge it. My father, Ol Shalom, he came to Eretz Yisrael as an Oleh Chadash in 1993 and had 22 good years here in Yerushalayim. He went to vote for the first time in 96, and he came out of the Kalpi, the voting booth, and he made a Shechianu. And I said, Pop, where does it say in Shulchan Aruch, Hayotzei me'akalpi b'pam rishona mevorchin Shechianu? He said, I was 12 years old in Kristallnacht in Berlin, and now I'm sitting in Yerushalayim counting my great-grandchildren. You don't think, and I'm voting for a government, a Jewish government in Eretz Yisrael. You don't think I should vote Shechianu? Believe me, I had no words. And he felt connected to V'techazena Einenu, that he saw things happening here in Eretz Yisrael, and that's why on his matzeva we wrote that he was a person who saw V'techazena Einenu b'shuvcha l'Tzion, and that is a Yom Yerushalayim message. In spite of what we're going through, and we're going through difficult times, let's not forget that we are the generation who are witnessing V'techazena Einenu b'shuvcha l'Tzion b'rachamim.